Speaking of songs, Steve's going to begin the program with a song.
I can play this.
Yeah, I was saying Steve's guitar is being repaired, so I got this one for him, but I've been told by other people it's a very difficult guitar to play with the action or something. So.
Abraham, Zarathustra, Ahab, 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 Ahab. Rama, Krishna, Ahab, 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 Ahab. Buddha, Jesus, Mohammed, Ahab, Ahab, Ahab. Every age, God's love is there. In this age,
Steve wrote that. Well, I kind of volunteered to come up and lob questions at Steve so he wouldn't be nervous getting up here to speak on his own. You want to start with any kind of introductory remarks?
Thank you for inviting me. I'll see you all.
He's very good. He even marries people here.
Oh,
yes,
yeah.
I heard he's a fall minister. So.
Not anymore. That was just for one day. So, I guess the question which I told you I was going to ask you is, what's the difference between the experience of a pilgrim in India and a resident there? How did things change for you when you became a resident? When was your first trip to India as a pilgrim?
1972.
72. Oh, so that was in the very early stages. Maybe you could talk a little about what it was like in '72, and then
The difference?
yeah.
Well, 1972 was quite different in the sense that it was, well, India itself was quite new to me in the sense of even going to India. I'd heard of Meherabad in 1967 and became a Baba lover at that time, and spent time in 1968 with Agnes Barron in Silence Day of 1968. And that was my last real contact with any Baba people, and I went back, after that time I was living in Santa Barbara. And at the end of that time I went back to tell my parents about Baba, because when I was going to college one day and decided that I had to, after seeing Baba's photo, had sort of an experience of knowing that I had to make a change in my life, and that it's kind of a burning desire to just take off and find Baba, follow Baba, and so that was the immediate recognition of just seeing his face at a friend's house. The friends that I went to see were not Baba lovers; they were in the music business, and from the San Francisco Haight-Ashbury. At that time, there were, I guess, Peter Townsend was pretty well known in the '70s, and there were, posters of Baba, and there were also psychedelic posters all up in the same places. And so I had seen Baba's photo at their house, and just had, I was kind of like going to school, kind of interested in school, but not doing well in some subjects. Others I did real well. And I just had this desire to just leave, because I wanted to change my life. I couldn't see living the life I was living, and I really wanted to begin a spiritual search. So I came home and threw all my belongings in my car, and I ended up driving away without telling my family or anyone where I was going. And at the time I didn't know where I was going, but I had some friends in Santa Barbara who were promoters of rock concerts, and they were putting on, the Doors were going to be playing there. And so I thought I'd go up and see them, and also see my friends. And they were guys that I went to school with, and I wasn't real close with them, but I sort of grew up with them and knew them. And they said, "Oh, come on up, and we're putting on this concert, and we'll be doing some other concerts, so come on up and visit." And so that was sort of, really, that connection was the main reason I even ended up in Santa Barbara. That was one place I could go because I knew someone there. So I just put stuff in my car and drove off and ended up in Santa Barbara. And
From San Diego?
from San Bernardino, where I went to high school. Wasn't born there, but we had moved there after my father was killed in an accident. We lost our farms and sold all our farms and everything in Minnesota. So my mother drove 5 kids in a car herself out to California, and we started life there. It was like 1952, 1951. All this sort of happened about around the New Life. So I always kind of, whenever I read about the New Life in the 50s and so, 49 and 50, sort of realized where I was in those months and what was happening. And my father was killed about that year, so there were a lot of parallels that I would think about, at those times, even as a kid, but not knowing about Baba at the time. So I went to Santa Barbara and stayed with these friends, and I didn't really like their scene because there were a lot of drugs, and I had taken drugs and been involved in drugs, but I really didn't care for it, and it didn't. I was more always interested in the spiritual search with drugs, even way back in the earlier days when I tried some. And I think we were all searching for a mystical experience. And it was mystical to have some sort of an experience that was an altered state of consciousness that, especially taking LSD, that some of the early LSD was very pure, and it was came from some of the labs that were made specially for work on Army soldiers. And, there were a lot of studies being done in the late 40s and 50s. My cousin was doing studies with LSD, and it was secret. He was in the service, and they were actually testing soldiers, and they didn't know what they were taking. So it's kind of bizarre to imagine that these guys were walking in and getting hits of LSD, and then they were watching to see what they were going to do and record it. But they had an understanding, I think, of the drugs. Obviously, drugs are not new. The government has understood the drugs. So anyway, I imagine that these guys were walking in and getting hits of LSD, and then they were watching to see what they were going to do and record it. But they had an understanding, I think, of the drugs. Obviously, drugs are not new. The government has understood the drugs. So anyway, and at that time these people were into drugs, and I was not into drugs, so I left. I was in their place, but every night I wouldn't stay with them, and they would go do their concerts and stuff. A few times I'd go to the concerts, but I would walk down this one street in Santa Barbara, and there was a huge fig tree that's still there. It's a big parent fig tree in Santa Barbara, right by the railroad station. And I used to go, these huge limbs they cover about a city block, and so I used to go sit in the tree, and I always felt peace there, and I always, was contemplating what I was going to do with my life, and where I was going, and all these things were going on in my mind because I just left home. And found out years later that Baba had stopped there and then visited that tree. So it was sort of one of my early paths of sort of following Baba's scent, because I used to go there every night, and I did feel very comfortable being there, and I always felt sort of the peace of God there, and also dealing with my own mind and trying to work out things and where I was going to go and where I was going to go. I think the last contact I had was with Agnes Barrett on Silence Day in 1968, and of course the messages that I had heard or read prior to that, the last one that I saw was that Baba said that he was in seclusion, don't call, don't write, wherever I am, my love is with you. And after that time in '68, in Silence Day, I was sort of managing this car wash. I went in to do this job as to do manual labor, and I didn't want to talk to anyone because at the time I was going through a real phase with the discourses, and for about a year or two I just studied the discourses and tried to apply that's knowledge and those truths to my own life, which gives you a lot of scope for work because there's so much information in the discourses. And while I was doing that, I was running out of money, and I'd had some money before saved up. And so I went to a car wash in Santa Barbara, and I thought, I'm just going to do a menial job. I don't want to talk to anyone. I want to just be one of these guys that does a job and nobody cares. You just do your task, and nobody houses you. So I went to this car wash, and I ended up, the manager was drafted into the Army, and the owner of the car washes in Santa Barbara was a real nice man, and he sort of liked me like a son. He had a daughter, and I think he wanted a son or something, but anyway, he befriended me, and so within about a month or so or less, I was the manager, and had like 30 people that are under me, and had these nightmares, every day of coming to work with only 3 or 4 people show up for work, and there's like 60 cars lined up to be washed. And these were the older days where you had to do a lot of the stuff yourself. You had these big mittens, and it wasn't like these modern car washes. So it became almost a nightmare because I became really involved in sort of, I had to manage, and I had to take care of the books and do everything, and detail these Jaguars and Rolls Royces and all this stuff. And it just, I didn't even want to do that. All I wanted to do was just do be the car wash guy who washes the car, and that's it. That's one part of it. So that went on, and I just finally, I think at that point, I worked for a few months, and that's when I had this desire to go tell my parents about Baba. And they didn't know where I was, and no one did. And it took me probably a year and a half or so to come to that realization in myself that I really wanted to share what I felt in myself was to be a real treasure of knowing about Meherabad, and knowing that He's God in human form, and that He is the Christ. And so
Were you out of contact with your family for like a year and a half? Yeah. Really?
And so I went back and I told my parents about Baba, and of course told them that He was Jesus and come again. And that didn't go over too well. It was kind of hard for them to take because they knew that I'd taken drugs before, so they thought maybe I was having some sort of reaction to something.
But are they Christian?
Yeah, my they're very strongly Lutheran. Believe in Jesus, and they're not fundamental or anything. But I don't think they were against it. I mean, it was hard, it was a shock to say that, you know, Meherabad was gone. And I had been gone, they didn't know where I was, they didn't know even what I was doing. And so it wasn't like they chased me out of the house or anything. I mean, they accepted it, but they were sort of like, yeah, well, he's on some trip or whatever. And at that time, there were a lot of different trips. People were following Yogananda, Krishnamurti, and it was that kind of search was beginning in a lot of people, and a lot of groups were out there. So it kind of was the beginning of all that, at least that I saw. So I ended up missing. I had spent some time with my parents, and then, of course, jobs in that time were very hard to come by, and I hadn't really finished college. I'd only had like a year or so of college, and was completely broke, had no money. So I was able to get a job working way out in the desert and working for this big contractor who does, they do roofing tars and, you know, buildings and things like that, and putting these hot tar on these roofs and tar paper. And so that was part of my job, was to do that. And one day I was carrying these big buckets of hot tar and walking across this yard, and it felt like my back had got a knife stuck in it or something. And whether it was a nerve being pinched or something, I don't know. But these buckets of tar were very heavy and very big, and I dropped them because my back sort of went out or whatever it was, sort of like a pinched nerve. And I dropped the buckets of tar, and the tar splashed on me. And it's at about 1200 degrees or something. So you can throw water on it, but it doesn't affect the boiling tar. So it's very hot. I was really lucky that I didn't, you know, I had some first and second degree burns, but no third. And so I went to the hospital, and needless to say, I lost the job. I was out of a job, so I went home. About that time, it was like 1969, and I had friends of mine, I was talking to them one day, and they had heard that Meherabad had dropped the body, and they knew that I was following Meherabad. And they sort of, you know, I remember I was in the car with them, and they had said something like, haha, your master's dead, he can't help you now because he's died. And they were not, you know, into anything spiritual, they were rock and rollers, and, you know, one guy said that, not all of them, but it was just, that was just one fellow's view or something. I remembered I was sort of a shock at first because my whole life with Baba had been that I knew that he was God, and that I was, you know, following him according to what he said and according to the discourses, and I was applying that to my life. And it was sort of a shock at first when I'd heard that, and it was sort of not a shock of a loss because I didn't know Meherabad physically. I didn't know him as a person. I knew his picture. I knew stories about him. I'd read, you know, Perfect Master and read different things, but a lot of books, but I had no. My idea was more of him as being who he was, as he says he was, as he was the Christ, he is the Christ, and so that my experience was something more different than this personal experience, that personal side of God. And so at that moment when I was going through that, there was sort of a sense of loss, but I had nothing to gauge it from because I didn't have that personal feeling. Personal relationship in that sense, a physical relationship with God. And yet at that moment I had this surge, this feeling that surged within me, and it was as if every cell in my body was exploding, and it was just this wonderful feeling, and it just went on. And at that moment, of course, it's timeless when you feel something, and it's a wonderful experience, and you can't quantify it or put a time frame because I don't know what time frame it was. Obviously I was sitting in a car talking, but at that moment, I had Baba basically saying, and I felt that he was touching me or that he was with me, and he said that I never die, I'm always with you, my love is always with you, and I'm always here. And I had that actual experience of feeling him with me. So I turned to my friends and I said, Meher is not dead, he doesn't die, he's living, he's here. They, sort of, I don't even know what they said, some comment or something, but I was still, I guess, in a shock in a way, but it didn't really change my relationship as it was with Baba because I didn't have any other relationship other than the one I had. And I had no real desire to call India or any of that because my whole beginning experience of MeherBaba was basically my own experience with him and my own relationship. I think I met a few people in Santa Barbara, and Tim Owens and other different, Andrea Wurtzinger was there in Santa Barbara. I think Sam and Irving's were there too. So I had some contact, but at that time there were small groups, and there were really just people coming to find out about Baba, much the same as today, but not, big solid groups who had been going on and on for years. And so at that point, I went back home, and after some time, I had a friend who lived in San Rafael, and he was a karate instructor. He invited me to come up and do some work with him, teaching karate in Marin County, which is north of San Francisco. So I ended up also packing up and going up there because I really wasn't finding jobs, and it was very hard to. 1968 and 69 were very hard economically in the country, and it was very hard to do anything, and I really kind of wanted to finish school, but I didn't have any money, and I really didn't want to stay in my hometown. San Bernardino, there's only one other person that had known about Baba has come from there, and that was Robert Holcomb, who's a Sufi and plays sitar. And he left there, about that same time. But I didn't know of him at the time in my hometown. But that was it. Other than San Bernardino was a very, very large county, one of the largest in the nation. And it's amazing. There's only 2 Babalars in the whole county and the whole city. So I went up to San Rafael and lived there for a while, and we taught karate, and we had these groups. It wasn't really karate, it was more a movement, and it was called The Changing Way, and it was based upon circles and movements of the body, much the same as Aikido and natural movements. And so it was a lot of it was mainly balance and work with the body, learning the body. And so we had classes that we taught for free and some for money, and the classes, there would be like 50 to 100 people in each class, and we did it in this old school in San Geronimo Valley in Marin County. And so there was a lot of scope for contact with people through that, and I did that for about a year or so. And I know along about the time, I know Baba had sent out this warning to his lovers. And I don't know, many of you probably read that or heard of that warning where he said, stay away from people who think they're gurus or people who are into different occult things and all that. And there's a whole, it's a letter that Baba had put out. And so, at the time I was with this friend of mine who was teaching these classes. Well, he became, because of the nature of having 100 people in a class or 50 in a class coming to his classes, his ego was very inflated, and he started, feeling like he was, I think he was almost thinking that he was like, had Christ consciousness or something. And I remember, and it's amazing. He was a wonderful person, and how he could work these classes. He had these skills, which there are people who have these wonderful skills of working with groups, and he was gifted that way, and he spent about 15 years doing karate, and he just would dream it and live it every day. And at night he would have dreams of these katas, which are whole routines, dance routines that would come to him in dreams. So he must have been a former master at some time who had maybe in karate and in Japan, because he had these connections with Japan, and he'd spent many years there living with the Japanese and training with them. Him and his brother were admitted into schools that were not even allowed by Caucasians. And so, anyway, he'd have all these things happen to him, and all these dreams would come. And I remember that letter that I'd seen that Baba had published, and so I just immediately one day I said, I'll see you, I'm leaving. And he was very shocked because he thought that I would be staying with him and working, and we had plans to have a few hundred acres up in Oregon and have training camps and this and that. And so I just left, told him I was leaving, and really it was about his prompting to just move on. So I moved on, and then actually I was in Marin County, and then I started hearing, I met Ivy Deuce, and I sort of met quite a few of the Sufis, and I wasn't really drawn to being a Sufi, although I was drawn to the discipline and so forth, because I had been studying the discourses and I was really into, following the spiritual path with wholeheartedly. And I kind of knew when I met Ivy Deuce that I wasn't really cut out to be a Sufi. I had long hair, and I just had these impressions that I was more in love with Baba because I saw that her pictures of Baba, and I was just in bliss seeing Baba's pictures, and I really didn't. She was a sweet lady, and we talked and everything, but I didn't feel any real strong connection at that time, just because I was really following this path that I was on. I ended up going to the Berkeley meetings, and Rick Chapman and Ursula and Mick and all these different people who were there. Scott McCaig was living there at that time. And a lot of these people just started coming back. Actually, in '68, I met Rick Chapman, who was giving a talk in Isla Vista at the college there in Isla Vista, Santa Barbara, University of Santa Barbara. And that was in '68. I met Rick Chapman and Alan Cohen had come, and they had a Baba film, which was really my first experience of Baba, seeing him physically, at least in a film. And it was quite moving. I mean, it was very cosmic. I saw that film and I couldn't believe when I was walking out. I was looking around at the sky and looking at people, and I had such an intense feeling of love that I was just, and I was probably grinning and didn't realize it, but I was just so happy that I'd seen that film, and it was being that was '68, I always felt that later that Bob was, he is alive in these films, only one can experience him. But even at that time, he was in the body. So I had this experience of that was really him, that he was really alive, and it wasn't just film, as Baba was physically on that film, and in the film, there in the presence of this auditorium. And so later I knew that Rick Chapman was up in the Bay Area. So I went to Berkeley and went to the meetings there, and it wasn't until really those people started coming back from, and I missed the last Darshan. I didn't know anything about it. In fact, my next contact was about when I came up to San Francisco in late '69 or so. And that's when I knew that, started meeting these people who had gone to India, and they had stories of all of the Mandali and stories of the last darshan and how they experienced Baba and how wonderful it was to meet Baba's brother and this and that, and Bayram and Jal and all the different people. And so then prior to that, I really didn't, because I hadn't had contact with people coming from India. I didn't know anything about that. I didn't know Mani was there. I kind of knew Mani was there because she did the family letters, but I didn't know really who she was or what she looked like or any of that. And so when people started coming back, especially from the last darshan, and then somehow that, started a little fire in my heart that I really wanted to go there and meet them and see that, and I wanted to visit Baba's tomb because I felt strongly I wanted to see the place where his physical body is kept, and where his center of all his work, where it emanates, the very core of that energy. And so it took about a year or so. I was broke at that time again, so I got a job and worked in the school systems, doing some gym programs and playground programs, things like that with the San Rafael City Schools, and did that for, I guess it took almost a year or so or more, almost a year and a half to save up the money. And so I went in 1972 to India and drove across the country, left my car at a friend's house in Williams College in Williamstown, Massachusetts, and ended up going to New York and didn't know anything. And I came into New York and I had, I think, a day or two before I was going to go to India, and so I was I thought, oh, there's got to be, I'd heard there's Baba groups all over. And so I looked up and I saw in the phone book that there was a Baba group in New York, and it was the Society for Avatar Meherabad. And of course at that time I still had long hair. Living in the Bay Area at that time, I mean, judges and lawyers, and I mean, it was common, everybody was more or less a hippie, and that was just the normal attire. It didn't matter who you were. Not everyone, but quite a few people. And So I went there, and I think I called up, and Anna Rosa answered, and she said, come on up. And so I came on up.
For those people who don't know, the society was, how would you describe
They
it?
were exclusive.
Very
In
exclusive.
fact, they rejected
Most of
people
us
with
could never have gotten through the door
long
there.
hair. They
Yeah.
didn't welcome people with long hair.
Yeah, well, I found that out.
And they all wore suits when they went to India.
They were dressed suits and
And
ties.
Anna Rosa was the leader, and I've actually heard some people who tell me she was a wonderful person. But I
Harry
guess they
Kenmore was.
They were actually,
Harry Kenmore.
she was with
It
Harry.
was mostly Anna Rosa.
But they could be a little rigid.
That's right.
Well, she had her own way. I mean, I saw both sides. I mean, I encountered both sides of that group, so I mean, immediately. And so as soon as I knocked on the door and she opened this little window, and she sort of said, like, who are you? What do you want? And I said, I'm Steve Myro, and I'm on my way to India. And she goes, who are you? Who do you think you are going to India like that? I mean, Baba would not like that. And you should cut your hair if you think you're going to India. And the Mandali wouldn't like it, and this and that. And all this sort of stuff, and I was in shock because I was just, you know, in that time, whenever my experience of Baba was just love. I mean, just feeling Baba. I didn't care about anything except just Baba.
You didn't know there was a dress code.
So did you
So
cut your
she
hair?
said, you know, you decide. I think I told her I had a couple days or something. She said, well, you decide what you want to do, but you decide. You decide if you want to cut your hair or not, and then you call. You see me if you come back or whatever. And so I kind of went and got this hotel room, and it was really. I think it was might have been a place where prostitutes were or something. I don't know. It was just it was a cheap hotel basically. It wasn't cheap for me, but at that time. But there were all people hanging out and different, you know, kinds of low-life people and everything around. I was sort of sitting in this room, sort of taking Baba's name the whole night, and it was very loud. And the lights, you know, the windows were just pure bright lights and neons going and this and that. So it was kind of not a pleasant night to go through. And so I did that the next day. I thought, well, you know, my hair was not a big deal to me. I wasn't attached to it, and it was just natural to just, you know, let it go or whatever. And so I went and I thought, well, you know, I'm going to go to India. I know it's hot in India. So I went and I cut my hair, and then I was not going to go back to them. I just thought, you know, forget this. But then, you know, somehow I had that desire to really connect and just maybe see Baba's picture or meet some Baba people, because I didn't know. I was kind of lonely there in New York, and I didn't know anyone else. And actually, and so I called her, and she said, Anna Rosa said, well, come on up. And I think she said, did you cut your hair or something? And I said, yes. And she said, oh, come on up, come on up. So then I went up again, and they opened the door, and it was just a complete change. It was like she, you know, opened this door graciously and come on in, and you know, she did accept me with warmth and love. It wasn't, you know, it was kind of funny. I just coming from Marin County, where San Francisco, it's just everything bizarre is normal there. I mean, it still is today. So I was just, you know, I'm not used to this kind of, you know, treatment. So I went in and they showed, I guess it was the year they showed this film where they're dancing and, you know, I want to be Baba's football, and I don't know what film that he did, but it's all these skits.
Right.
There's Roman skits and this and that. There's segments of evolution or different civilizations, and it's all about Baba, and it was kind of neat. They had just finished the film, and so I'm sitting at dinner, and I might have had a shirt that buttoned, I don't know. But everyone else is sitting in, like, you know, suits and ties, and they're all sitting proper, and, you know, I'm sort of sitting there, and I felt really out of place because I wasn't really dressed, and I thought, oh, this is pretty strange. But they were nice. I mean, I met quite a few of the people who were there, and I still see them when they come to India. And I still remember, you know, the conversations and some of the, you know, the few people that I would talk to there, and they remember when I came. Some of them, most don't. Anyway, it was a nice experience, and it was a nice evening. We had a meal, and it was a very formal dinner. Saw the film, and then I think we saw a Baba film, also some slides or something of Baba. So that was a real treat for me, and that was sort of my send-off to go to India. And it was quite wonderful to be able to have that experience, because I didn't feel comfortable just sitting in the hotel room.
Kenmore had taken some very good film.
Did you meet Carrie that night?
Kenmore?
Yeah.
No, he wasn't there.
When was this?
72. I think he
What
died.
kind of year?
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, he did. He already died.
He died in
When-
71. I just missed him because they
You
talked
should
about
know,
him.
when did he die?
71.
1971.
71.
Yeah, he'd been with Baba for some months.
Oh,
I think.
then,
But then, I mean, they were still, the routine was there, but it wasn't.
You know, Steve, in one of their films on Coming to Baba, it's like a musical or something,
Yes.
they depict long hairs and they show them as being like lost.
Well, that was their whole,
The society.
the whole experience was that, and actually, later I became, Anna Rosa somehow, I mean, I was nice to her and I would help her and things like that because she's, I realized that she does, and it took me after meeting her when the whole society group came to India, I think that same year or something, the next year, 72 or 3, they came when I was there and they came as a whole group.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they did that thing during Amartita, that big stage thing.
Yeah,
I was there, yeah.
goodbye Maya. Yeah.
Exactly. It was
So
very-
I grew to like Anna Rosa. I mean, I grew to see that she's eccentric. I mean, Baba.
yeah,
Yeah, very much.
for
Half of her life.
no, she has
Oh, you were in
done
the society?
many very
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
And I
worthy
survived.
things.
Wonderful.
It was Jose.
Yeah,
was
Jose.
there then, yeah.
I remember seeing Jose. Jose has incredible stories from those times. Anyone who was there,
It's very
Jose
complex.
was
It's not.
lived
it's
there
not
basically.
Yeah.
Anyway, but I grew to like her and I grew to accept her eccentric nature. I don't think I could have been in that group or been with her at that time. I might have if the draw to Baba was that strong. Maybe with Ken more, I don't know. But she definitely was instrumental in drawing a lot of people together, keeping people off drugs and keeping people together. And she had that.
Yeah, it was pretty, most people came because of doctor
Yeah,
and stayed.
Not because of
yeah. I know they sort of filtered away.
Has she passed away?
Yeah.
Just recently.
94.
yes.
But anyway, that was sort of my send-off, and I remember going through New York, and I was leaving, and I didn't know anything, and I didn't really have a lot of money. I was going very cheaply, so I can't remember. I think I even took buses with my luggage, or trams and buses, or what do they call them? Subway. Whatever. So I was taking those things, and didn't know where I was. I was trying to go to the airport, and I think this one sort of street person befriended me, and he was really he was a real street person. I mean, very unbelievably a street person, and dirty and everything else. But he lived in the subway, and somehow we started talking, and I said I was trying to get to the airport and everything, and he told me what to do and helped me, and he even took me through a couple of different sections, long sections, like 20 minutes here, 10 there, and this and that to get to the airport. And it was amazing because, I mean, when I told people about that experience of being with this guy, of course, people were looking at us on the subway and everything, and I was telling them about Baba and this and that. But I was so innocent that I didn't think anything about it, and people that I knew from New York, they were saying, you were crazy, because the guy would have killed you or taken your money or something. But I just had I was in this little bubble, going to Baba, and so I think I felt protected all the way. And I really didn't have any fear of doing any of that. Even coming to India, going to Bombay and taking a bus to the train station and having to wait hours and hours for a train and pouring, it wasn't raining, but just uncomfortable weather. A little tiny kid came and helped me find my way on the train and even helped me get my ticket for the train, and he spoke perfect English, and he was only just a tiny little sort of raggedy Indian guy. And so I never did figure that out. I mean, I always thought Baba sent this agent to come and help me as a little kid, but he got my ticket for Pune, did the whole thing, and helped me do it, and I think I gave him some rupees, but he didn't ask for money. And it was just real amazing, because I remember every trip after that is usually a nightmare, even as many times as I go back and forth. There's always nightmares, there's always problems. Taxis breaking down, or somebody trying to steal this or that. Anyway, so I went to India, and that was in '72. And getting back to the question, I guess, was it was quite an experience at that time being with everyone there, because you really could spend the whole day there. And I spent 4 months there, my first trip.
Where did you stay?
Stayed basically on your own wherever you could find a place, and so there was a place called the Dalit Lodge across right from the Trust and down from the Ashoka. People stayed in both, and I stayed there. There were other people there. There wasn't a lot, but there was always a group of people. Anytime you went, there would be people passing through, and mostly all doing the same sort of traveling, not knowing what they're doing. And it wasn't so much as coming on their vacation as finding out what they're doing in life and where they're going. A lot of them staying for months and at a time. So I stayed there and stayed other places, and I also stayed with Erich's uncles. And I stayed at Akbar Press, and I stayed with Myro at one time at 7-Up, where Norina mother's place. And
How long were you there?
I was there 4 months, in 72, 4 months. And so the wonderful thing was being able to, we would ride bikes out to Meherabad and be able to, I would just, basically, I think Mansari, most of the days that I wasn't in Meherabad, she took care of us, and she would feed us breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And so we would sit there all day and talk to her, and go to the tomb and spend hours in the tomb, and there were very few people. It's quite special to be able to go in the tomb and have no one, and sit there, and sometimes I'd be alone with Mansari and everything at times.
Did they always have arti even in those days?
Oh yeah, Mansari always did. It was very...
But not many people, I think.
Not many people. Certain people would come at certain times, but nothing like it is now. Now people come morning, the morning, mostly people staying there. Evening now people come from all over. They're driving through and they stop and come to party.
Did she ever teach you how to make those thin wafers? What do they call? The
chapatis?
Transparent.
Oh, those things.
Yeah, those things.
She used to make all those things for her.
I never had anyone else make that except for Mansari.
I used to eat everything she had. Sometimes she would just get a jar and take the mold away, oh, this is good stuff. And, you'd see the mold being pushed aside, although there'd be a bunch on it. And, but she'd put it on a chapati and give it with such love that you would just eat it, and it was so wonderful.
And that chapati was baked from the flour that the birds were sitting down and flying over.
So that was wonderful to have that experience, to really have that time at Meherabad to be almost alone. And then to go out to Meherabad, we'd ride bicycles out and then spend the whole day with Erich and all of them. Pendu, and I was real close to Pendu. I spent a lot of time with Pendu. Somehow he became my mentor in a way to Baba, and even though it was hard for him to speak because of all the accidents, and very hard for him to talk, and very hard for him, physically, he was suffering tremendously and in a lot of pain. And yet he would see you coming, in the driveway or whatever, and he just struggled to get out of the chair, and you'd see him struggling for 5 minutes before you could even get there.
Everybody knows that what you're talking about was the result of the second accident.
With Baba.
You might mention that. Yeah.
Baba's accident in 56? Sitar.
65. Baba's second accident was 50. Let's see when we returned.
56.
That's the first time I heard
56,
about that.
56.
52 and
56.
58, right? No.
58?
No, 52 is the first one.
56.
And the second one, after he retired,
Second one,
came
yeah.
56. It was still 50.
I meant the second one was 56.
November
Sitar.
56.
That was in India.
Yeah,
The one
that
in
was the second.
America was 52. Oklahoma.
First one, yeah. This was
So he was still suffering from that accident.
A
Yeah.
broken
second.
pelvis in that accident.
Yeah.
Pendu did.
Yeah. So he couldn't walk, he sort of had a cane. But all of that experience, and when I was there in 72, 3, actually, Francis was there then staying. He'd come and stay for a while. So he was there also, and it was just wonderful to be there. You'd sit in Mandalay Hall and you would sit there all day. I mean, it was like, you would have your lunch and stuff, and most of us brought just a little something, and we really didn't, they weren't serving lunches, the Pilgrim Center was not around, so basically Nadja would come out every day and bring us food that she cooked, and she was Baba's cook, so she would bring her chapatis, her food, everything was just unbelievable. To this day I've never tasted food, like if you ate a chapati that she cooked, it would just melt in your mouth, it would just, disappear. With such flavor, and of course she served Baba all those years. So we were lucky to get, they didn't feed us full meals, but they definitely were always bringing out fruit or this or that or stuff from the garden or Baba's mangoes. Myro would always send out stuff. And so it was wonderful. I know one experience that happened, we were there, and it was during the monsoon, and it was just so, storm happened, and I don't know if it was a monsoon, but a storm was happening, and it was incredible. It just flooded everything, and at that time, we were either riding bicycles or we would try to, sometimes you could catch an ST bus, but they were very irregular. You could stand out there for an hour or two waiting for a bus. Sometimes it just wouldn't come. If one of them broke down, it wouldn't come, so you were just stuck waiting. And one time, I remember all of the men, Mandali, plus Francis, they just walked us out, and it was pouring rain, and it was already late at night. It was 5:30, and it was starting to get dark. Might have been even getting on to 6:30 and getting dark. And they walked us out down to the end of the road, and it was just pouring rain, and they all gave us their, raincoats and things like that to take. And we stayed at the end of the driveway, and Eric started telling stories of the new life, and hardships that they had, and this and that, the kind of weather and stuff that they did all the time, that they had to, like not having tea or coffee or not even milk or chapati for days at a time, especially during the musk hunting and all those travels with Baba. So there were some stories told like that, and it was just, I remember the experience was more wonderful to just sit there with all of them with us, and we were waiting, for a truck or a lorry or something to come by, coming into Nagar, from Bamburi or whatever, the town that side of Meherabad. And so we waited and waited, and I think we waited for an hour or so, an hour and a half, in this pouring rain, sort of sheltered under the trees. And it was just a wonderful experience to share that. I mean, we're getting wet and it's uncomfortable and it was horrible, but yet they're just telling stories. Eric is telling new life stories, and I always remember that feeling. It's not really the stories because I'm not good at remembering every detail, but just that feeling is always there. Just that association with them and then them telling the stories. And so we finally got piled onto a truck and made it back to town. So it was quite a bit of a different experience, I think, in those early days. But it's
only 3 years after Baba dropped his body. Was there a feeling that there was kind of, Baba's absence? Was that felt there in the lives of the
I think what struck me to be most profound was that sadness that all of them carried. I mean, because of what Mani had said, even when she saw us, she said that Baba said that you would come and all of you would come. And she always says that because that's what they believe. And I felt that, obviously, in my experience of, seeing Myro go and Mani, it's quite... There's a sadness there for me that's so profound, and there's also wonderful gifts that have come out of that. But the sadness for me, so I imagine what that sadness would be to someone like them who would serve Baba, for their lives, and to have him disappear, to just leave them physically. I mean, they know his spirit is there, and they feel that. That's never been a doubt. But physically, the trauma and the shock of his physical presence not being there felt so, I felt that it was great and heavy, but I didn't know what that was because I couldn't gauge that, but I knew they had that sadness. I remember when Myro would go on the porch and try to talk, and she would just break down. She would have a thought of Baba or a remembrance of Baba, and she would start crying and crying, and she couldn't talk. And that would go on, and we would stop all just, there sort of, what do you do? There's nothing you can do because of her love, her sorrow was so deep that it was, physically it's the deepest sorrow I've ever seen anyone experience. Not in the terms of wailing or, oh me, poor me, or whatever, but in terms of that sadness of her beloved being gone. And so that was hard for me because Myro was so present with that suffering. And yet she liked people, who could lighten that. And she had favorites, and she had people, who would entertain her or whatever. I was, I did like Fred, but really true, and she liked that. And so many of us, I was just in awe of her. I felt worthless just being there, you know, in front of her as a male because of all the different things and knowing who she really was. And I mean, I had dreams of her and Baba and after she died. So I knew who she was, and I knew her status of being Baba's beloved, flower of creation for Baba. And so that was wonderful. I mean, and it was wonderful. I remember one experience that I'll share because it was kind of almost time.
No, that's
Keep going.
One experience that was just wonderful in those days. I don't remember if it was that trip or the second trip when I went back the next 74, 75 for 4 months. But we were sitting on Mira's porch, and she was telling her stories about Baba, and her stories would be broken up with her crying and just losing her breath and just, you know, gazing off and almost losing herself with Baba. And it was hard to be there because, you know, but it was wonderful just to share because she had that intense suffering happening. And it was sort of just, you know, really experienced that kind of suffering. She was telling a story of Baba, and she just was looking out towards that little room in the back there, that across from the porch. That wall, there was a wall and a tree, and where Rhoda and them stayed now in Saudi. Monty's little office was in there. And anyway, she's on the porch, and she's talking about how beautiful Baba was and how he, you know, did this and that. And then she looks at the wall, and on the wall, she just sees something, and of course there's only 3, 4, 5 of us, 6 of us there maybe. And she looks at the wall and she just starts to, you know, goes, oh, Baba. She gets off out of the chair and she walks over, and then she goes over to the wall and she starts pointing out these shadows that are created by the tree, and the sun is going down, it's like late afternoon. And there's shadows on the tree, and there's like 5, 6, 7 profiles of Baba, and they're actually like pictures of Baba on the wall. I mean, they're all profiles, some side view, some Baba with his full hair and full mustache. And they're all distinctive ones that you see, you know, the famous ones, of Baba when he's young, all that. And she just goes over and she just, oh, this is Baba when he, you know, 19, whatever, 25, and his hair was this way, and he was doing that, and he started to silence. And she just went through all the stories, you know, connecting these different profiles and sort of that were appearing on this wall, and they were there about 10 minutes or something on this wall as the sun is going down. And it was just, you know, and it seems so natural. You're sitting on this porch and you're looking, and she's telling you about all this, and yet afterward I thought, you know, this is phenomenal. I mean, and I've seen many things like that now since living in Meherabad. So I know Baba, you know, Baba's face is in everything, and his name resounds throughout everything. So it's like, I think if we become tuned into that, we see it more. But that was quite a beautiful experience, and she just spent quite a bit of time, you know, telling stories of each one, and I don't even know if that was, you know, recorded or if anybody. At that time, there were people really not, you know, recording with tape recorders and stuff. So I imagine a lot of those kinds of experiences, those in the moment kind of things, were lost. I mean, I didn't even write any of those things down. I never did write till 1987 when I came back, and then I wrote a whole journal, which I'm kind of writing out now, but it's taken some years to write it. But so that was a wonderful experience in '72 to be there at that time. There was appeared to be a lot of suffering, but the willingness for all of them to share, to tell stories. I mean, Erich was a human dynamo. I mean, he could sit in there for hours and talk and tell these stories. And now, of course, you know, as the years are later, it's very hard for them to tell a whole story, to get up there and to speak for any length of time. Even, I mean, it's phenomenal how, like, Bauji can get up and talk for 2 or 3 hours, and it's just one who has the kind of health problems he has. And it's just each one of them has this charge that Baba has given them that's just so profound. The energy they have, the love that just flows through them, and they're able to do these sort of things that are really, in a sense, inhuman. When you look back, even today, you see Goher, who can hardly, I mean, she's very, you know, getting very weak all the time. she's a little better, but before the season ended, she was extremely weak and extremely, in fact, she couldn't come out, and she was not coming out. And then she got a little better towards the end, about the last week, and Shelley was not even going to go to the West, and then she was able to for a couple of weeks. So it's kind of now we're seeing, you know, the other side of their lives, of their complete lives given in service to Baba, and it's quite, you know, it's wonderful to experience now. I mean, anyone that can get there to experience them, it's still the same. The sweetness is there, everything is the same. It's, you know, quite a time to take advantage of that experience.
So you were there in 72, you went back again
74.
74, and then after that?
Then I went back, actually I went from 72, I went and lived in Myrtle Beach for 3 or 4 years. And so at that time I was in Myrtle Beach, I went back. So I was living near the center, would spend a lot of time on the center, which was a nice, wonderful place to be near. I don't know about the living there is quite something. It's very hard to live away from the center and come to the center because the center is so profound and has so much, this feeling of Baba's love. And the minute you come in the gate, it's just, you're hit by this wave of love. And
isn't that true? That really
and outside, you're really not. It's like a wave of Maya. So it was harder to live there, and it was harder to be in that community and live there, with the kinds of things that go on. But it's really a nice place for people to come and to be close to Baba and to have that connection with Baba, especially at that center, which Baba's presence is so present. And so in 75, I went back to my family and saw them for a little while, which I hadn't seen them for some years. And ended up moving to San Diego. That's where I lived in San Diego. And that's when I started 75, 76, 77, coming up here to Los Angeles.
And that's where he made a mark as a champion runner.
I knew you were doing a lot of running there, but
Champion runner.
you were a champion?
Yeah, well, I had an American record and
Oh, really?
a couple of different records.
In what?
Just for the whole area.
Like 10,000?
Didn't you know that?
15,000 and 5,000. For my age group, you know, for the best in America.
So, and when did you next go back to India?
So I went back, actually, I ended up a long process of not till 87. So I spent, that's almost like a dry period of 12 or 13 years.
And you shared, right? When you came back in 87, you brought your journal.
Yeah.
And it was wonderful because was you there, Jeff? It was really a great evening.
I don't remember, did I share that?
Yeah, when you came back, you had this beautiful journal, and I think that's what really inspired you to want to move there.
No, I knew in 72 that I was going to
yeah.
be there, but
Oh, really?
yeah, I had, the financial part is the hard part.
Yeah.
So 72 you wanted to move there, but the next
Well,
18
I
years
felt
were spent
connected in that I
right?
wanted to go there, and then it wasn't really till I was able to, some years later, actually I got married in 1976, married a lady who had 2 children and helped raise them for some years, so any thought of having extra money to go to India was non-existent, being that we were both trying to go to school and work. And so it took, there were about 8 years of not having any money, and any time I would get money, my truck would blow up or something would happen. So it was very hard, and then the whole time I was like, you know, communing with Baba, just saying, Baba, if this is what you want, I'll do it, this is my life, I'll be here, but I don't want to be here, I don't want to do this. And, I don't, you know, not that I didn't want to do it, but I would prefer to be serving and then go to India. But, so that didn't happen really till 1987, where I started a janitorial business and I started making money doing that. And, my stepfather, my mother had remarried, and my stepfather died, and he had put away some money secretly that no one knew about, and after he died, my mother found it, and I think he had one account with $100,000 that he'd saved on his own. So my mother, there's 5 kids, and so my mother split up some of the money between us kids, and it was amazing because I went back to India in '87 for I think 3-week visit, and it was my cleaning business, I would usually work with a lot of very eccentric, wealthy people in Rancho Santa Fe and La Jolla, California, and they're very expensive homes, and somehow I'd always find these people that I would get close to or befriend, and they usually paid very well. And so that was a nice experience, and then I became very close to this one couple, and I used to go see them and do a lot of work for them, and then I ended up helping take care of them and saving her life. One day she had a stroke, and she passed out at the dinner table, and I gave her CPR for about 20 minutes, and until the paramedics could get there. So they said I'd saved her life, because she would have died, and kept her oxygen to the brain. So anyway, that was the experience with this lady and this family, this actually lady and her husband, who were very nice people. Very sweet, very eccentric, and so I would tell her about Baba. She knew all about Baba. When I was planning to take this trip, because I'd saved enough money to go to India, and this wasn't really planning to live, but I kind of had enough money that I thought I could, go spend some time in India. And so I was trying to walk around and to break this news to these people, because I was there with them a lot, and so many days out of the week, and I was like their caregiver and helping them get to the doctor and this and that. And really they treated me like a son, and so I felt real bad, because I'm not bad, but I just felt like it was very hard for me I wanted to tell them I want to go to India, but I had this sadness that how do I tell her, that I'm going to leave, and they won't have me there, and how will she feel? I didn't really know, but I knew that they liked me and everything. And so I remember I was walking around one day, and it was actually, I didn't do it that one week and the next week, and then it got to be where, like that last week before I was leaving, and I had to tell them. And so I still felt apprehensive, I don't know, just feeling that I didn't want to hurt them or something. And so I was walking by, and she was very perceptive, and she said, "Do you have something to tell me?" And I said, "Yeah, I do. I've been wanting to tell you something for the last week or so, a couple weeks." And I said, "I've realized that I now have saved enough money, and I want to take a trip to India." And she goes, "Oh, that's wonderful. You should go to India." And so she just basically,
That was Baba talking.
and it's so wonderful, because she just, gave me that freedom to go. And she's the one who actually said, "Do you write?" And I said, "No, I've never written anything." And she said, "Can you keep a journal?" And I said, "Yeah, I can." And she says, "Yeah, keep a journal and write about your trip. Tell me about it. Can you do that?" And I said, "Sure, I'll do that." And then she said, "Do you have a camera?" And I said, "No." And she said, "You can take mine." And I said, "No, I'll get one." And she said, "Take pictures, and I want to see some pictures and stuff." So on that trip, I went, and from the moment I left, I just started, I shared it here, I didn't remember that I did, but a lot of poems had come to me through that trip. And so my whole trip, from the first time going to India, was a wonderful trip, and it was filled with Baba's love, very cosmic in a way, and it was just my own experience, and I'd never written anything in my life, so it was like spending that time to just write my thoughts. And so I did that, and I also took a bunch of pictures, many pictures of everyone, all the mandali in Meherabad, the pathway up to the hill, everything, the tomb. When I came back, I gave it all to this lady and sat with her and her husband and told them all about my trip, and spent some hours telling them and gave them the pictures. And she had slept with the pictures, and she, would take them to bed, and she said she slept on them, and she dreamed that she was at the tomb and had visited Meherabad and everything. So she'd been there in her 70s. And so it was I felt that, it was worth all of what I went through, because I didn't want to do that. I never took pictures. I never do any of that stuff. I just sort of recorded and keep it in my own. But it was nice feeling to be able to share that with her, and to give her that joy and that experience of really being with Baba, because, a couple years later she died, so she wasn't able to come to India, and she was not in great health to be able to do that. So they did at least get to hear about Baba and have that experience.
I hope you did what she said about the journal. You have such a fascinating life. You keep the journal.
Yeah, I have, well, of that. No, I don't keep a journal of my daily stuff. That was only in that trip. But I do write up certain things.
So in 1990, though, you went and moved there as a resident.
So when I went back in '87, I had talked to Monty and about the possibility of living there and staying there, and she said, "Fine, what you do is you come for 6 months and you see where you fit and how you could, find out if you can even make it here or what you can do here." And since I didn't really know what I would do there, at that time people would come, and now it's more people come with a duty or come with some project. But at that time it was more open. People would come. Not a lot of people wanted to come or were able to come. I mean, a lot of people I think want to come. It's very hard to sort of give up that part of your life and financially and otherwise to try to come there. So when I had come in '87, I talked to Monty, and she gave me a lot of support and everything. And then I had talked to different people, and they said, "Oh, you need this certain amount of money to come." I mean, that's every year it's something different, but at that time I think it was some small figure like $20,000 or something. And so obviously I had no money when I went. Those times I was broke, the early times. But so when I went back home, and my father had died, stepfather died, and I got some money from that, and I had money in the bank. I'd been saving for some years, and it was just very hard to save all this money, and to try to save money. And, I was going to school and working, so it's much harder. It's hard to save money when you're having to pay for school. So what happened at that time when my mother called me in to give me some money, she said, "I have something to give you, come on in." And I went into her bedroom, and she pulls out sort of opens up this bag, and she takes out these stacks of $100 bills and puts them on the bed. And then of course at the moment I'm looking, and I knew what money I had. So I looked at it, and I kind of knew, but actually I counted it in front of her, and I was just surprised because each time she'd put a stack of I don't know what they were, $3,000 or $4,000 stacks or something like that, and she just kept putting out stacks. And so then I got all those, and I was just, for me it was quite something because I was struggling all the time for years. And when I saw that, I started counting it, and I knew what I had in the bank, and I knew what I was saving, and I knew what I could get for selling my business and this and that. And it actually, the money that was there on the bed, plus the money I had in the bank, plus everything I had, was exactly the amount of money that I thought I needed to go to the dollar, not to the penny, but to the dollar. So I just was in bliss, I had this, I was so overjoyed with joy of just having that. I said, I can go to India, I can go now. And, the other thought was, well, I could go buy a new Forerunner or something, a new Jeep or something, but this was so much more special. And I just, at that moment, knew that I can go, and I just thanked Baba. And my mother thought I was, she thought I was so overly happy because I was getting the money, but I was so happy that I could go to India. So then I wrote a letter to Monty and said that I was coming and would be able to come, and that it was my heart's desire to come. And she wrote back and said that she wanted to see that my heart's desire was fulfilled, and that she welcomed me to come. So then I came about a year later or so.
And you said that she had said, "Come and see where you fit in." Where did you fit in?
Well, that's the hard part. It's hard to fit in.
What are your duties there?
Actually, I'm working now under Ted Judson, and we do take care of all the maintenance and upkeep of the tomb and all the buildings. So when I first came, it was very hard in a sense because I walked around and I didn't really know. I knew Ted. I think the first time I came, I'd helped do some volunteer work with Art Namakipi. So I knew different things, and of course Erica was taking care of Muhammad.
I think most people know he's the architect.
Yeah, Ted, the architect, and
Yeah.
mainly pretty administers the.
He also has set up the blueprint for the archives and the museum and all. He's quite an architect, isn't he?
Yeah, he's doing a lot of projects, and so everyone's very busy now. And so I went, and Ted was about the most available person that I could see myself doing something with. I mean, I don't know that I could work with Gary too. Although I could now. I didn't know Gary. And Erico he was pretty strange at that time when I first met him. He was on a phase where he was pretty musty, or he was angry or something. So I knew I was just, it was just a phase. But I mean, everybody has phases. And, so I don't know. It was hard for me. I just sort of walked around and I knew I'd done painting and I'd done maintenance work and things. So those were kind of things that needed to be done, and I could do things like that. So I'd also worked with American Indians and been a social worker and worked with youth programs and administered different programs. But that's a whole other side when I went to college for that. And in India, there is no, at Meherabad, there's no need for any of that sort of stuff.
Well, Adi had, I know he had Adi Durrani. He was sponsoring a couple of boys' schools, because he sent me there.
Oh, yeah.
So there are social service things.
Oh, I knew that. But at that time, at
everything.
this time, it's just the basic running of Meherabad was all that was being. Now there's quite a few projects. They have the new archive project. They're attempting to get ready to build a new pilgrim center, which will be on the back side of the hill, Baba's tomb, near there. But it'll take some time, obviously, a few years to get going. But they're preparing the ground for that. In other words, they have to plant trees, and they're kind of doing a master plan. And the new archive building is under construction, and that's a huge project. It's massive because the building has to be built in such a way that it will house these archives of Babas, and so it has to be, the technicalities of it for India are unheard of, because it's even more technical. I mean, it's as technical as the most technical buildings, say, in like a museum or something in America.